Okay, so if you could state your, and spell your last name for the clerk, and your address, and then you've got 10 minutes once you start.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. My name is Owen Bjorgan. Last name is spelled Bjorgan. I am a resident of Niagara-on-the-Lake, just next door, and I'm a citizen of Canada. I don't represent any official group or party. I'm a concerned citizen and also an academic. I graduated from the University of Guelph 2 Aprils ago with my Bachelor of Science in Biodiversity. We've heard that word make not only a lot of media coverage, as we mentioned today too, but it's also making the rounds more on everywhere from social media to a general discussion to right here in the room today. So my specialty and the reason why I'm here today is to discuss the environmental concerns and implications following and surrounding the Thundering Waters Forest property, which is a 484-acre property on the outskirts of downtown Niagara Falls here. So as many of you may know, thanks to the extensive media coverage, I was one of the, I'll say fortunate, believe it or not, you're thinking of bugs and mosquitoes being the majority of the property is a provincially significant wetland. I call it a privilege to camp out for the past week. Our title, if any, our, meaning the core group of campers that stayed there for a week, is the Land and Water Defenders. And we are defending the basic human rights to a healthy environment, which we should stand for here in Canada. The example is now in our backyard in Niagara Falls. I'm going to slowly build a little math equation for you here. In my University of Guelph years, I failed math once in first year and nearly failed it again the second time around. The math I'm going to give you today, though, is something that I understand and I hope you understand as well. First part of the equation is I'm going to talk about Carolinian Canada. Carolinian Canada is a life zone or an ecozone that covers just 0.25% of Canada's land surface area. As we know, Canada is an enormous country in terms of size. 0.25%, and that area of land stretches from Windsor to Niagara region to the GTA and not much else at all. It is the most species-rich or biodiverse ecosystem in the whole country. Yes, up north Ontario is wilder. British Columbia and the Yukon are wilder. But in terms of species richness, so the number of species of plants and animals that we can record and find in our backyard, it's right here in Niagara. It's part of Carolinian Canada. So that's a sincere privilege, I would say, to live in this area of Canada. It's the same reason we can grow peaches. We have a special climate in this ecoregion and habitat type that allows species of plants and animals from the southern and eastern parts of the states. And this is the northernmost, the very tip northernmost of a lot of the species range. Some of those species of plants and animals of which are found at the Thundering Waters Forest ecosystem, as once declared by Bjorgan and Associates, and also myself and the various academics and citizen scientists, we'll call them, who have been surveying the property extensively due to our concerns that the 484 acres there is a truly remarkable and valuable ecosystem in both quality and quantity. And I'm here to speak on behalf of that today. Carolinian Canada, most species-rich zone in the country. Pretty incredible. In those 0.25% of land area, we also have 25% of Canada's human population. So you can see the contrast and the battle, if you will, for land use issues, and maybe that's possibly also why I'm here today too. I understand that that is a conflicting sort of scenario. Richest ecosystem in the country, booming population and economic growth. I understand that that is a conflict. We're going to build on the equation a little bit more. We're going to talk about the characteristics of the provincially significant wetlands there, which cover a significant portion of the property, nearly 2/3 of it, the 484 acres. And of those provincially significant wetlands, wetland is an overarching term, which could mean a swamp, a bog, a fen, or a marsh. I'm not about to go Bill Nye on all of you and explain the little details of each one. That's for myself to geek out on. What I will tell you, though, is that the majority of the ecosystems we see that are provincially significant wetland are a swamp forest or a slough forest, characterized by a low clay plain, undulating plains. Those depressions and the undulations fill up with winter snowmelt and spring storms and rain. They fill up and they create these temporary oases for amphibians, invertebrates, and reptiles to reproduce successfully in an environment where there is no fish. That doesn't sound like an important detail, but it sincerely is. There are no fish in these waters, in these swamp forests that gobble up the eggs, the juveniles, and the adults of these respective species that are trying to reproduce. So we have an old growth forest on top of that. Old growth forests contain large trees. Large trees, of course, get big. They grow in size. Some of them become hollow. Some of them have branches break off. They fall over, die, become logs, etc. All that physical complexity of logs, trees half falling over, trees standing upright, hollows, holes, rotting, you name it, it adds extremely to the biodiversity potential for a property versus a young forest or versus a farm field that is growing back to a more natural state. Old growth or virgin forests and ecosystems are incredibly more valuable for the most part for biodiversity, and that's not just here in Niagara, that's all over the world in most ecosystems. The other part of the equation I'm building today, this is the statistic that I gladly woke up and crawled out of my little hammock tent, covered in mud between my toes and behind my ears, and every media reporter that I spoke to in that state, I hammered home this statistic, and I'm here to stand and do it again proudly, and not so proudly now. We've lost 90%, so that's 90% of original wetland coverage in Niagara region. That is a shocking number. I use this analogy with some of the very counselors who came out to visit. I would like to thank Kim Crater, Carolyn Arnani, Mike Strange, Victor Pietrangelo for coming out and visiting us to just learn about the property. I think the four of you would agree that our stay-in was not by any means aggressive. It was not foul-mouthed. It was not improper in any way, shape, or form. In fact, it was even okayed by the police for the whole week we stayed out there. I told the statistic to you, and I'm going to use this analogy again. If I had a piece of pie and it was 10 slices and we all together in this room somehow ate 9 of them, and it happened kind of quickly, and all of a sudden, boom, there's one piece of pie left. I guess what I'm saying in the big picture, in this metaphor, is everyone in this room needs to have a much more serious discussion on what we're going to do with that last one piece of pie. And right now we feel, we, meaning academics, citizens, and the Indigenous community, and everyone else who's been involved in this issue, we feel someone figuratively has reached in aggressively and taken that one piece away, or is about to at least, without the proper consultation and knowledge. We need to have a better, longer, more serious discussion about this. Speaking of the camp, actually before I get to the camp, revisit our math equation. Carolinian Canada, most species-rich ecosystem in Canada. Old growth forest, that is valuable and irreplaceable as far as the habitat goes. Biodiversity offsetting cannot tell you otherwise. And then plus 90% of wetlands gone. Plus equals, in my books, from an ecological and professional standpoint, irreplaceable. That's my math for the day. No more math. Now, why the Savannah campout? The Savannah section is an area of the property that is prone for the development right now because it is not a provincially significant wetland. We camp there because from an ecological standpoint, there is a concern about what developing the Savannah section, as we're calling it, which doesn't have large trees, is a regrowth from a farm in the 1930s, 40s kind of area. It's still a valuable habitat unto itself, and its adjacency or its gradient into the swamp forest ecosystem is a case in point of how symbiotic the whole ecosystem is. So we can't just look at the provincially significant wetlands, build all around them, block them in, and then say, don't worry, we protected the provincially significant wetlands. Basic ecology says otherwise, and that there are concerns surrounding that. My concerns include how the hydrology and biodiversity may be affected. I've given this example before at Regional Council as well. Biodiversity. If we build all around those PSWs, the species that call the extreme south of Canada and Ontario home in Carolinian Canada, those populations, be it salamanders, owls, deer, endangered or rare species, plants, whatever it may be, they're boxed in. They're protected under a PSW, but they're boxed in, and that immediately increases the opportunity and chance for inbreeding. And inbreeding in biology, it often is shown that it leads to negative consequences for populations. And then the populations die, and then we go in and survey that PSW again 10 years from now perhaps, and we say, hey, this species isn't found here anymore. This species isn't found anymore. I guess it's no longer a provincially significant wetland. The development continues. So we fear a domino effect after choking off the biodiversity by boxing it in. There's also concerns for hydrology. If you just saw the storm that blasted outside the building here, with regards to climate change in the big scheme, whether you believe in it or not, it is likely that Niagara region and Southern Ontario will see more extreme weather events. And when we pave over and use agriculture for the majority of Niagara region, which it already is, we should be taking pretty seriously areas like our 10% of remaining wetlands in terms of what they do for us with hydrology. So if we paved over, for example, the Savannah section where we camped out at, what's going to happen when we have all these urban and residential contaminants that are now running and flushing into the provincially significant wetland? What's going to happen when we have a major rainstorm or event in this new development worth millions of dollars, and then all of a sudden we have water coming into people's basements in their new home because the wetland can't function the way it used to because we've effectively choked it out and ruined it by building all around it? that is a concern as well. So we camped on the savannah because, believe me, I've camped in a lot of places all over the world. Camping in the swamp forest, not too ideal. So it's a more comfy campground, yes, but we want to raise awareness of where you're standing right now. As I said to the counselors when they came out and visited, where you're standing right now at our camp is the area slated for development, and that has effects on what's going to happen over there on the, what is approximately 333.6 acres of PSW. In my time in Niagara, I have done lichen studies. I won't bore you to death with those either. I've done studies on insects and woodlots as well. And I've also filmed a documentary on all of Niagara region regarding its natural areas of importance. One thing I can tell you from a professional standpoint, and maybe a personal remark as well, is that there is no ecosystem and property like the Thundering Waters Forest that I personally have ever come across in the Niagara region. And again, I'm putting it on the big scale where we think this is unique to not just Niagara, therefore, but it's unique to the country. We have quality and quantity of habitat. It's a true relic, and I think it would be an absolute waste of a natural wonder and natural capital to see that property gone. So with regards to an ecosystem, to again build all around this and say we protected the provincially significant wetlands is slightly misleading and, dare I say, even erroneous. Developers, city planners, etc. Those are the sorts of people who draw straight lines across a map and say this ecosystem ends here, this ecosystem stops there. I understand why it has to be done, of course, in order to make decisions on land use and planning. However, in nature, ecosystems do not draw straight lines. And so the concern is, again, by developing one area, we're not necessarily saving the PSWs that we're praising to protect. So that's the big picture of what's happening on the property. Now let's look at the big picture of what this means for a global scale and a global example too.
Owen, are you able to wrap it up? We've gone over the 10 minutes. Are you
Oh,
close?
sorry, I got a little excited. I can wrap it up right now. I'm on my last point.
Okay.
My apologies, Mayor. Big picture for climate change. This property is a carbon sink. It is known that old-growth forests and wetlands are the best carbon retainers of ecosystem types all over the world. If you want to talk about climate change in the big picture again, if we were to degrade that habitat, ruin it, or remove it altogether, we would see that carbon released into the atmosphere contributing further to climate change, which would be a shame in today's day and age. So I'm going to wrap this up very briefly here by saying that this ecosystem is one of a kind, both to Niagara and Canada. The concerns are not only environmental, but Carolyn, I believe you asked for some emails earlier and some letters perhaps that have gone between our Mayor Jim Diodati and the Premier. I have 10 copies of them right here, and I'd like to give them to all your councils right now because apparently some of you haven't seen them. And to me, that is a concern when 484 acres of property with a $1.5 billion project attached to it, and you guys aren't in the loop as you were 1 or 2 years ago when we showed up at these meetings too. You haven't been in the loop because you haven't been informed. If I can be a helpful cog in the wheel and an honest citizen through the freedom of information, I have copies for everybody right here. I'd like to start by distributing these four. I'll pass those along.
Councillor Carrio, you got a question?
And that is my time for today. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I didn't have a question, Your Worship. I enjoyed the presentation. He did stick to what he said he was going to, you asked him to stick to. And I stand corrected. I'm glad that I heard what you had to say. You did it very well.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Councillor Rhino.
I'd like to thank council for voting to let them speak. We've had them here before to speak, and if I'm not mistaken, we didn't let Cindy Forrester speak on the same issue. So I was glad to see we've advanced and let this group speak. And I have to say, I'm so happy you got to shower. You promised you would all shower before
It looked
you
like
left.
chocolate milk. Yeah.
It was a little scary when we were out there. I just want to say, you know, we talk about young people, or you read stories about young people that are derogatory, and I am so impressed with your group. I am so impressed with your passion. I told your mother I think you might run the world one day, so I'd like to be here to see that. So I just want to say congratulations and thank you for coming and informing us, and thank you for the stand that you're taking.
Thank you. And Owen, yep. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm glad that we made the decision to permit you to speak. I know it was controversial. I was concerned about the solicitor's comments, how it might affect the future, but I was truly impressed with your comments, and one of the best presentations I've heard on this issue. Mr. Smith was excellent also. but truly a great presentation, and I don't know how you did it without mentioning the planning issue. Very well
It's
done.
my little secret. Yeah.
Okay, Owen, so thank you very much. Appreciate you coming out, and I'm sure we'll be in touch over this as it progresses.
Thank you.
Thank you.